What's up guys, I just wanted to do a quick video and share the difference running an FPS cap versus uncapped can make in Cyberpunk. Now what I've done is I've tuned my settings to simulate what someone might be getting if they're running a borderline playable system. So you might have a slightly weak CPU, or more importantly a slightly weak GPU, where for your resolution and your settings that you want to play at, you might be around 40 to 50 FPS. And when you get into populated areas, you might notice you're dipping under 30, which is where you're really going to start to feel input latency. So this is what I wanted to share this testing for, is because I noticed there's a stark difference between the in-game FPS cap and external FPS cap tools. So right now I'm running uncapped, and as I said, I've tweaked my settings so I'm getting around 40 to 50 FPS to simulate those lower end users. And I've got my resolution scaling on 80 because my GPU is not strong enough. Like if I put it to 100%, I literally get 30 FPS and high input latency. So my GPU is not good for 3, 4, 45, 44. But anyway, with these simulated settings, I'm just going to show you. This is uncapped. There's no frame rate cap, and in Rivatuner, my frame rate limit is uncapped. So I'm going to just walk through this area. So at first I'm going to reset the benchmark. You can see in the bottom right, you can see the frame latency consistency, how much it's fluctuating, and mainly pay attention to the minimums and the 1%. But more importantly, the 1%, because if you're going to get stutter, the 0.1 picks up really, really fast micro stutter that you probably wouldn't notice during normal gameplay anyway. It's more if your 1% are low as well. If your 1% and your 0.1s are low, that's when it really makes a difference. But the 1% are what you want to focus on, and the minimums are like your average FPS drops, but 1% is your 99th percentile. So even the 1% are hard to notice, but if there are big drops on 1%, that's where you'll get that stutter. So I'm going to reset that counter now, and you can see it's sitting on about 43, 47. Okay. And we're just going to do a lap of this area and come back. And then I'm going to reload the save at the same point. So walking through here, and you can just see I'm trying to avoid like fast camera movements because, to be honest, that will increase GPU usage and can tank the FPS. I've also set my crowd density to low to avoid the CPU affecting the result. So even though this is an intensive scene with a lot of NPCs, it's on low. So this is like the best you can hope for anyway in this area. Doesn't matter what CPU you're running, like no one can turn the setting down lower than low. So come back to the weight sign, and you can see 43 and 1% are 39. So 43 and 39, and we're just going to jot that down in Notepad, uncapped, 43 and 9. Okay. Running something else in the background. Shouldn't matter anyway. Just remote testing. And now we're going to use the in-game cap. So this is where the difference matters the most. Some people might run an in-game cap because they've already learned from other titles that running an FPS cap can help your system, because it basically gives you more headroom to handle FPS drop better. When your GPU is not running at 99%, there's an intensive scene that comes up. If your GPU has more resources available, it should just make perfect sense that more spare resources means less FPS drop when there's more intense scenes coming up. So we're going to set it to, our average was around, what was our average? Actually, sorry, I recorded that. Our average was around 50. I mean, even walking around the block's not going to affect it too much. Maybe I was slightly under it, but we'll try capping it to 45. Like, we don't want to cap it down to our uncapped rate. I mean, like our normal minimum, because that's too low. But we'll just try capping it to 45 to see if it makes a difference. So 45. So you'll notice the overall frame latency is higher, but at 40 FPS plus, it's more than playable anyway. At least in this game, I don't feel bad in latency at 40 FPS. I'll reset that counter, and I'm going to walk around the block again. And we'll see if we get the same kind of minimum in 1%. Probably should have reloaded. I think I did. So 45, 41. I realize this is not like a perfect rerun with that same theme, but 45, 41, and we will reload that one time just to make sure that there is an improvement. Because the uncapped is like already set, like we know the uncapped drops to roughly that 45 1. And we're just gonna reload. I'm pretty sure I did reload it, but maybe I didn't. Just to make sure, because when you reload a scene, even if there were no NPCs around, it'll suddenly like randomly generate NPCs. Like even if you've been in that area for a while, you'll get fresh NPCs and maybe more load. As you can see, there's more NPCs in this scene now. The rest like wandered off before the first testing. So I'm gonna just test again. This is in-game cap, 45, and yeah, we're definitely getting lower 1%, but the minimums are pretty good. They're actually holding 45 on minimum. So I just want to walk back to that street sign, back to the wait sign. I swear there's an invisible post there. Okay. And 4538. So run 2, 5, 8. Here, 45. Both times the minimums were higher. And 41 and 38. So not 39, but maybe we should do one more uncapped run just to make sure that I did have a browser open accidentally in the first run. So we want to make sure that that wasn't affecting it. I'm just going to reset that, and actually the NPCs are still there. Oh no, we'll reload. We'll reload it. I don't know, bit of both. Reloading is probably the most apples to apples comparison because it lets it spawn in at the same, like, similar locations, however many it does with this scene. But this is more to show a big difference using an external. I haven't even got to the external part yet. So reset that, wait for it to level out, reset it. You can already see the 1% wants to drop straight away. 4437. No more vehicles this time. Not good. 4438. Seems pretty consistent actually. The result reading. I think that was really close to what I got the first time. This scene has got a bit of repeatability to it, but 43, 48. It might have been 44, 38. We'll use 44, 38. I think I walked a little bit too slowly across that thing, but run 2, 3, 4, 38. So you can see here, very similar. This one seemed really good for some reason. I think it's because I kept walking after the first run, and it might have not had enough NPCs. We do want some NPCs, we just don't want tons of NPCs that the CPU is struggling. So 4438, 4538, you can see that it's like basically no difference. So little benefit, and now we're going to do external program. Because it was proven already in Horizon Zero Dawn that an external tool worked better. So 45 again, and we're going to load this scene back up. Remember to load it this time. Now I realize I'm not doing like 10 test passes each time, and this is only one GPU, one isolated test bench like setup. But it's more just to show you how the game is responding to my changes, how the game's behaving, and you might be able to replicate these results and get an improvement of 1% lows. But basically, 45 using Rivatuner, and look at the frame latency graph. You've been paying attention to it before. It's fluctuating like 1 or 2 ms the whole time on both the previous tests. And just have a good watch of it now. And I'm just going to walk around this same block. You see running in front of me. Now this is a pretty stark difference for me. Like I kind of was amazed when I tested this repeatedly to see if there was a massive difference, particularly for just in-game exploration. But just having higher 1% is going to affect your overall gameplay, especially if you're at borderline playable frame rates in the first place. So yeah, look at that. 45, 45, 45. I zoom in and make it drop, and left and right. And you might think, well, maybe it's stuck. Well, look what happens when I shake the mouse and artificially increase GPU usage. See that? See the stutter there? That's because that's like abnormal. It makes the GPU work harder to do that kind of thing. That's where you test your input latency. But if I do it like a normal type of panning, and I'll reset that counter, it's not dropping. It's consistent. The consistency has basically improved considerably on the 1%. So Rivatuner 45. So uncapped, I gained 6 FPS from simply running an FPS cap. And this is where you're going to notice it the most. Like, I'm not putting the averages in, but this is where you're going to notice your performance, like your FPS drops and stuff like that. You're going to notice it on your 1% lows. Okay? So if I uncap that now, just to give you like straight up, you can see like I can't fake this. I'm just using Alt-Tab to go in and out of the game. If I uncap that, I am getting higher average of 50. So yeah, that's great. 50 FPS versus 45 FPS. Like I am losing 5 FPS, but I'm trading it in an area where it matters more. So I'm trading that 5 FPS in averages or maximums because my GPU is only able to go up to 52 FPS in this scene. Trading that 52 FPS, that 5 FPS there, for 5 FPS in the 1% load. And so now when I walk around this scene, I reset the counter. You'll see, even just as soon as I reset it, it doesn't even hold 45. As soon as I start walking, it drops down to 41. Like, how did I walk all the way around the block before? Reset it again. I just reset. So I'm resetting the counter while walking to try to get it to hold 45 FPS, and it just drops straight away. I can't even get it to hold anywhere near the 45 on 1%. So, you know, the average is better. I'm not going to, like, argue with that, but if you care about your FPS drops, your stutter, or especially if you're running 30 FPS, for example, you might be running 40 average and dropping under 30. If you cap it at 35, you might get a consistent 35. As you can see, I'm walking around the block and I'm resetting it. It can't hold, for even just a second of walking, it can't hold 45 on my 1% load. It's kind of ridiculous. And if I just cap it again, just to make it a straight, because I've just been walking around this block. Who cares about the NPC? Just walk around this block, and I've capped it again with Rivatuner, and take a look at that. So that's game engine, that's the in-game FPS cap performance is not working very well. The in-game cap clearly is not as consistent. But I'm showing it like live on video, this recording. You can see the recording timer in the bottom right. Like, I can't cut and paste job. Like, you know how much effort, it would take too much effort to try to fool anyone by editing a video to try to fake this kind of difference. I'm walking around the block multiple times holding 45 FPS while running uncapped, constantly dropping. And you know, like I can just shake the camera and you'll see the FPS drop to prove that it's actually recording properly and benchmarking properly. And if I reset that counter back to 45, so I press F7, it resets the benchmark counter. I'm back at a consistent 45, which I've traded 5 FPS on my average for 5 FPS on my 1% lows. That's basically what I've done. You can see my GPU is not running at 99% anymore. There's headroom to handle these 1% load dips. So I think this is valuable. I think this can help a lot of people. If you just are OCD and you want best, most consistent performance possible, this is basically console-like consistency, for lack of a better term. Like if you see those Digital Foundry videos where they talk about how consistent console frame rates are versus PC where it might fluctuate a little bit more, this is what they're talking about, having this kind of 1% low. Even the 0.1 is actually holding, which is crazy. Like, that's super good. And as soon as I turn that FPS cap off, and I reset the counter, it cannot hold 45 anymore. It's not bad. Like, obviously it's still playable. But you can see there's a difference, right? Like, I'm not going crazy. So there's less NPCs because I haven't been reloading the scene and walk around the block repeatedly. But as soon as I like press F7 and reset the counter, it goes under 45, and I'm like I started walking. Just simply walking has dropped me under 45, and it drops down to 40. So 0.1s are under 37 now. And resetting that counter does not help me fool it. Like I could spam that counter, and you'd see me spamming it. It would probably cause more stutter trying to spam it while walking. It's actually making me drop to 40 more. I'm hitting, like, I've hit 7 like 10 times now. And as soon as I go back in here, and this does work at higher frame rates too. If you're OCD, you want to hold like a consistent 60, this can help you reach that. Not necessarily for combat, because combat's too varied and you will get FPS drops, bullets flying around. If you're a hacker, it'll probably help because you'll keep your consistent frame rate when hacking, because it's not like there's not as many effects on the screen. Usually you do it from much further away. But yeah, you can see that the 1% and 0.1s are just like rock solid basically out of exploration. Even with the tram going overhead and zooming in and looking at stuff, my 0.1s are crazy good. So yeah, normally this is all hidden to the user though. So if you're getting like slight micro stutter or slight stutter that you just can't put your finger on what's causing it, and you're just running a normal FPS counter, you're not showing your benchmark counters, which is you have to activate that through MSI Afterburner and Rivatuner settings. You activate it through here in settings under benchmark. You have to set a hotkey. You have to set a benchmark output file, like I've got mine there, TXT file that I delete or recreate every now and then. And you also have to go through setup, and you can set the polling rate, the interval that it's counting at. The benchmark interval, I think you just leave it how it is. It's set on, where is it? Yeah, the frame rate averaging interval is 1000 milliseconds. And the first period 150. But anyway, I just left that basically default. You can see here, even the injection delay, 15 seconds. Set that to like 5 seconds. But anyway, just for the sake of it, like I didn't even need to keep counting because you can see the stark differences. Okay, and now we're gonna try just to show you guys that it can also help at higher. Like the actual settings I play at are not these settings. This is to simulate a low end setup that would benefit the most, because you're gonna notice improved 1% lows when you're dipping under 30 the most. So if you're dipping under 30 a lot, like if I, for example, set my resolution scaling to here, but that's actually too low. Right? In this scene, it's too intensive. That's not bad. If I set it here and then I turn the FPS cap off, you'll be able to see my average is lower. I'm at 40 average, and my 1% are dipping 45 average, and my 1% are dipping to 34. I can actually feel input latency now when I pan left and right. It's pretty bad. And I wouldn't play this frame rate. I consider it too laggy, especially for shooting. Exploration, it might be fine, but yeah, 33, 1% is pretty bad. And this is what I mean. So see the 1%, 33 and 30, 0.1? That's where your stutter is, where you feel it the most. And I'll just reset that counter, see if it drops to 33 again. Yeah, straight away. Drops to 30, into the 30s, where you start to, like a VSync type of latency when it's too low. And basically, what I would cap it at based on this performance, like based on if my hardware was only pushing this kind of performance at these settings, it is what it's doing. But I mean, it could be applicable to your setup at 1080p or 1440p. You might be running like borderline playable, which is 30 to 40 FPS, right? My 1% is where the stutter is going to be, and maybe my 0.1s, but the 1% are 34. Okay. Just gonna try to make sure that it gets to 34 with the counter. Dropping again, yeah, 35. Like it's basically doing the same thing. Whenever I reset the counter, it drops roughly the same numbers. So what I would cap it to maybe is we'll try 40 first, see if there's an improvement. And there was. Oh, there was a stutter there. So I don't know what caused that. We'll see if it keeps doing it. Sometimes like a random stutter can just occur because of some background thing that you don't know about, like some NPC or car or vehicle doing something, and you miss it. So reset the counter and walk again. The 1% are already starting to hold higher. Oh no, it's dropped to 34, 27. Okay, still doing it. So at this resolution scale for me, it's still, I can't get like playable 30. Like I don't want it dropping to under 35 basically. You drop to 34. So I could try capping it. Just an example of how you how fine you can tune it. 37. Let's see if 37 percent is better. So before I was dropping to 34 on the 1%. Still feels a tiny bit of input latency, but not as bad as before. Like I'm only doing small movements, not super fast movements, which will drop the FPS artificially. Like I can tank the FPS just by flicking the camera too fast. But this is just more for repeatability. You can see that 1% is not dropping down to 34 anymore. So just by simply tweaking it a little bit lower on the average, I've again shown it. Even at I've like increased my in-game settings. My resolution scale is normally at 70%. So at 90% resolution scale, or if I was on a lower end setup at 1440p, and I was getting around 40 FPS but dipping under 35, you could actually cap it to 37 FPS and get more consistent 1% lows. I've just reset the counter again. And see what I've done? Like I literally just, I haven't tested this specific setting at this specific frame rate cap before, but by capping the frame rate to just the right number, I'm able to give enough headroom for my GPU to handle those 1% low drops that we're going down to 30. I've walked all the way around the block now, and I'm panning the camera. Like I'm not purposely trying to hide camera movement and just like trick anyone. There we go. There was a stop 34 when I panned up and down. But I can guarantee that would be worse if I was running uncapped. So 35, 34 when I was panning the camera a lot. And if I uncap it again, and the camera a bit more like I was doing, I'm already 41, 36. But you can see, you can just look at the frame rate graph to get an idea of the fluctuation involved when you're not running the cap. Like how much more it fluctuates. And that can matter a lot more if you're playing borderline controlled frame rates, like 30 FPS around there. So 39, 34, and I could just cap it again. I could even try 36, try to improve it a little bit more. And just look at the frame latency graph. See, panning will obviously drop it, but this is just more like the concept of whether there's a benefit or no benefit. And you can see, like, tram went overhead, the carriage thing, 36. 1%, 36. So even if it's like a 3 FPS improvement on your 1% lows, that 3 FPS, if you're really pushing it, that 3 FPS could be all the difference. But then again, you could just increase your render scale, and I will just show you the high FPS difference now, just so you can see that it's not like a placebo type of thing. So if I uncap the FPS and I run a 70% scale, this is where I get up to like 50 to 60 FPS type of frame rates, right? Now if I walk around this block now, there are still NPCs, like there's almost no one here. Like, I'm trying to take CPU out of the equation. Like pretend you're running a 3600. If you're running a Ryzen 3600, you could run medium high with much less variation in frame rate than what I would get with my 4-core 6th gen CPU. But this is just more to show you. Look at the 1% and 0.1 and the minimum 54, 47. Reset the counter. See if it drops straight away as soon as I round this corner. Get back over near the police. 57, 49. This is kind of just like a busy area. You see people walking over there. But 57, 49. Okay? But yeah, the 1% are at 50. Okay? I shouldn't be doing too much panning though, because it affects the review mode. Yeah, I have to like kind of look at the same process cross trading to get repeatability out of it. I'm just resetting the counter now. I'm just going to stare straight ahead to make this more consistent and see if we stay above 50 on the 1%. And you know, we're averaging 60. That's great. Like it's good to average 60 FPS. And a lot of websites will say, you know, 60 FPS is like the holy grail of playable performance minimums. But when you're talking average and 1%, you can have a 60 average that's tough because the 1% is important. But anyway, I feel the 1% is more important than that. So maybe you're with me on that. Now we can see 1% 49, okay? And now we're going to cap the frame rate to 55. So this is at a higher frame rate, just to show that it works. It helps both with lower frame rates where you're GPU bound, and it still helps at higher frame rates when you've lowered your settings and tweaked your settings just right. If you want to get closer to playable 60 FPS settings, for example, it has already made a significant difference to my smoothness, and I can pan around fairly fast and maintain that 55 on the 1%. Like, I'm sure there's some players that have been like trying to smooth out their frame rates, and they'll just be looking at this like, what the heck? It's almost like I'm cheating to get this type of consistency. It's really just to do with the in-game FPS cap and how the game runs compared to using an external FPS cap. So if I just go straight back out of this, take that FPS cap off, and see if we hold anywhere near 5 again. So uncapped, I'm getting like higher FPS overall, but my 1% has already dropped 5 lower. And I can reset the counter multiple times and have it drop straight away. Well, because I'm walking, simply because I'm walking. Even if I stop walking, wait for it to stabilize, F7, and it just drops to 52, 49 straight up. So just like at the lower frame rate where I was pushing my GPU a bit harder, lowering the resolution scale and running a higher FPS uncapped still has me hitting 99% GPU usage, and the GPU just has no headroom to handle things in the background that are causing it to drop FPS. It could even just be like billboards, just the textures, the volumetric fog on the ground. It just has no headroom left over because it's running 60 FPS and the resources are being allocated to maybe the wrong things, like it's drawing extra frames and it's using its horsepower to drive the road at 60 FPS. And as soon as some volumetrics come on screen, it drops under 50. So this is the smoke here that I think is dropping the FPS the most. Because it's trying to balance the overall scene and it doesn't have enough resources for it. So as you can see, I'm dropping 1% 48. And now I can boost my 1% from 48 to 55 simply by setting that cap. And I don't know, it's crazy. Like, I use this with all titles actually. I do it in Warzone, I do it in Horizon Zero Dawn, and I proved it works in Horizon Zero Dawn. And just take a look at that, walking through the same smoke. I'm holding 55 FPS. Crazy. Like, this so much more consistent from those 1%. And if I had a stronger GPU, this is just an example, to simulate a stronger GPU, I would have to lower my resolution scale and pretend I can get 60 FPS plus. Okay? So I'm getting, if I take off this thing, it starts to get really blurry under 70%, which is why I don't run 60% render scale. But you can see here, I'm able to push 60% render scale, I'm able to push over 70 FPS. And as I'm walking through here, I'm dipping, I'm resetting it. If it dips under 60, I'll reset it. So you can just see it jump up for a second. 71. As soon as I start walking, oh, that was bad. Wait, reset that. As soon as I start walking, the GPU is just pegged at 99. It's got no more spare resources to handle additional effects that come onto the screen. You know, the volumetric over there, dropping under 60 easily. And the 0.1 is 10 FPS lower than my 60 FPS target. So if I get any stutter, it's going to be 1% of the 0.1 is dropping. You can see 5750, alright? Even though I've got a 72 FPS average. Now, for the most part, you probably won't notice it. This is perfectly playable. You wouldn't notice it. You wouldn't have an FPS counter. You wouldn't be staring at it. And you'd be perfectly happy with 70 FPS. But if there is something causing your system to drop FPS, having that cap will just give you the spare resources to handle the FPS drop. You might be able to avoid the odd stutter here and there, running on particular settings and for your system. But this is just to prove that running an FPS cap can help stabilize your frame rates and make a good difference to your consistency. Whether you're looking at the frame rate graphs or you don't run a counter at all, if you're getting slight dips in your FPS and you've only checked it to know, like, oh, for example, you check your frame rate, you go, I'm running 70 FPS average, and you just turn it off, you don't worry about it again, but you're getting the odd hitch, then capping your FPS to 60 instead of 70 might help you smooth out those 1% that are causing you to get FPS. So that's the theory behind it and why I'm sharing it with you guys. And I'm just going to cap it now to 60, get to see if we can bring, because it was dipping under 60. I'm just going to reset it now and start walking. So I'm just walking, I'm not pressing anything else, I'm not resetting the counter. If it drops, you'll see it, like you'd see like a minuscule drop, and if I was hitting F7 to reset the benchmark, you'd see it going 57 and 60, like you'd visibly be able to see if it was dropping a lot or not. So I went from an average of 70 dropping under 60 to now I'm holding a solid 60 and holding a pretty solid 1% 60. So see that difference? 58. But the main point is there's more headroom, there's more resources available. It should be very easy for anyone, even like a non-tech savvy user, can understand that not running your GPU at 99% gives more headroom to handle extra effects as they appear on the screen, and that can prevent stutters. So, and the way that, like, the method for testing that is what I'm doing now, is you're seeing whether the 1% string, which is where your stutter is going to be. Okay? Then I'll turn that FPS down again. Like, this is turning into a way longer video than I wanted, but I wanted, like, even people who skip halfway through the video can still see that I'm showing the same method, and they'll probably be able to take notice. So see the 1% immediately dropping under 60, I press F7 and try to reset it. Okay, as soon as I start walking, just turning the camera even a tiny bit will drop it under 60. The 1%. Like 0.1s are very, very, very almost unnoticeable, or pretty much unnoticeable without a counter. But the 1% you can notice stutter on a bad 1%. But you can see here I've been resetting it every now and then, and it keeps dropping under 60. It doesn't matter that the average is 70, it's going to drop under 60 because there's no headroom for additional rendering. 49. Yeah, even 49, 50 is already 10 FPS under what I would like to have as my 1%. So if I want my 1% at 60 and I cap it at 60 with 70 FPS headroom, that 70 FPS, that 10 FPS over 60 pushes into my 1% volume, for lack of a better way to put it. I'm getting, all that horsepower is being put in reserve so that I've got like an extra spare 10% GPU headroom left to handle FPS drops. So you can see the 0.1 still will dip every now and then. That's just a game engine and optimization that will be improved over time. But the 1% is just so good now by capping it. And I've got that spare headroom. You can see the GPU not running fully pegged out. So see the 1%, how much better it is? Sorry if I'm repetitive. Like, hopefully you've already stopped watching if you got what you wanted out of the video, and you're not just like waiting for me to show you anything else. The only thing I can also point out is that my GPU temperature has also dropped from not running uncapped. So there's this additional benefit of running a cap, is you get better frame rate consistency on your 1% lows, and you get better GPU temperatures, and probably CPU temperatures, but it depends on your settings too, and your cooling capacity. But see my GPU, 73, 72, 74, let's just say under 75. Or, no, it went up to 77. The bulk cars under 80. Okay, we'll say under 80. It's fairly consistent, mostly under 75, and jumping up to 77, 76. Okay, and the 1% I have not reset it that whole time. I walked around the block the whole way around. It stayed on 60. And as soon as I turn this cap off, you'll be able to, I'll just wait for everything to stabilize because I was all timed out. You'll be able to see how high the FPS can go, like it actually can go up to 80. But now we'll see my 1% dropping as soon as I go around the block. It's already dropped under 60. And look at my GPU temp. It's not even getting near 75 anymore. I gained 10 FPS on my average in exchange for lower 1% and higher temps. Now both variate, like uncapped or capped, they're both perfectly playable at these settings and at these frame rates. Like my frame rate is consistent enough that even if it drops under 50, like to 45, that's still perfectly playable. Just to make it that clear. But I would like 1% higher is obviously better. So just like for the sake of it, like kind of like when you build a computer, this is a weird analogy, but if you build a computer and you can get like a VRM that goes up to 80 degrees, which is perfectly acceptable, but you can just like pay an extra $5 to get a VRM that sits at 70 degrees, would you do it? It's kind of like that. It's like, would you get the additional benefit for free, or for almost nothing, if it like it's free, basically? Or even if it was the same price, like if it's the same price, if you had two motherboards at $150 and one of them ran 10C cooler on VRM, but it was both within tolerance, why wouldn't you go with the better motherboard or the better settings? If that makes sense. So yeah, if you can have 60 FPS 1% lows, or you'd rather have 55 FPS 1% lows, are you going to notice stutter at your average or at your 1% low? It's at your 1% low that you're going to notice stutter. So you can see here I cannot hold over 55 FPS. As soon as I reset it multiple times. You've probably seen me doing it. So 57, 59, standing still, it starts to climb back up. And yeah, setting that cap is totally different. So I hope that helped you guys, and if you skip to the end of the video, you can at least have an idea that running an FPS cap makes a huge difference for your consistency. You get lower temperatures. I'm running about 70, not 70, I'm running 5 Celsius lower on my hotspot on my GPU, and I'm getting way more consistent frame rates for free. So it's like, if all you got to do is install Rivatuner to get this, why not? And I'll just make sure that you know how to do it. Basically, look for MSI Afterburner on Google, install the app, it'll run in your tray, and open up Rivatuner. It'll ask you to install Rivatuner alongside MSI Afterburner. Obviously, install it, and then you can use the global setting to set an FPS cap. That works fine. Like, you set it through there, it'll just cap it through all your games. But if you play different games that run at different frame rates, you can just go to Add and look for your Cyberpunk folder, wherever that may be. So for me, it's in my Steam library, and Cyberpunk, and usually it's not the first exe you can find in the folder. You might have to look in like the bin x64 folder. There's the exe. Add it into your Rivatuner, which I've got added here, and then you can set an FPS cap on a per game basis. So you can see here I've got it capped at 60, and that's all you got to do. Like, I don't use Rivatuner for controlling my fans or anything like that because it messes with Radeon settings. Just use my Radeon performance tab for all of that stuff and the fan profiles. But yeah, just to show you how easy it is to do. And yeah, there we go. I'll just show you the frame rate again. Just let it stabilize. Alt tabbing can cause it to be a bit funny when you alt tab back. So let that stabilize and then walk around. And I'm sure, I'm like 95, 99% positive that most people can replicate this, as long as you're not pushing your GPU to absolute limits, and it's like a really, like if you don't have enough VRAM, for example, and you're running a resolution that runs above your VRAM limit, then no amount of FPS cap is going to necessarily fix your stutter, because you're going to be texture swapping. That's a different problem altogether. Okay, I'm more talking about when you're running like fairly playable settings and you're getting good FPS, or you're getting like fairly playable FPS, but then your dips are just lower than what you'd like. You can improve that 1% low by setting an FPS cap. And yeah, it's going to matter more at 40 FPS, 30 to 40 FPS range, where the input latency is much worse. While at 40 to 60 FPS, even if I kept it at, say, I've got it capped at 60 now. If I kept it to 50, I probably wouldn't notice any input latency difference. And if the 1% lows were at 50 instead of 60, I wouldn't really notice, but it's free, and it saves me a few degrees on my hotspot. So if I get like better 1% and better temperatures, why not? Maybe to bring in more time. Skirt. Okay, you can see there how much more inconsistent that frame latency graph looks. And it's the same type of graph they use on Digital Foundry when they're testing consoles and the console consistency, and they actually run it at a much higher refresh rate. But this still, oops, not enough. I reset it and I dropped it to 57. and my GPU temps are up closer to 80C. My average GPU temp, not the hotspot, the average is at 3 degrees higher, and it runs at 60C when I cap it. So see that hotspot, and the hotspot's the rightmost GPU temperature, and the average temperature is the 62C. So even if it's like a 3-degree difference, it's like, why not? So you can see the frame latency graph right there. This is just at the front of the, where is this? Right at the front of these apartment buildings, where a lot of benchmarks were run. They like this area. Yeah, you can see what I mean. But the only problem is I'm running at a low render scale, and that makes a lot of distant textures blurry. A little bit of blur I feel is natural because no one has perfect vision to see with perfect clarity without zooming in with the camera, which is what your optical vision can do, cybernetic vision. But in terms of role playability and whether faraway details should be super crisp, I feel that it's subjective. You could enjoy having slight blur to your distant buildings and still have really high detail close up. So even though I'm at 60% render scale, this machine looks perfectly fine. And I can zoom in and take a look at these burrito signs and read them. They're not like full on blurry, but, and you see the model number on the vending machine. But I do have my preference at 70 minimum. I don't like to play under 60, that was just for testing. So at 70 minimum, I can't play 60 FPS anymore consistently. It like drops way more. You can see it's dropping under 40, 70% render scale. And if I simply cap that to 55 FPS load to match the performance of what my GPU can handle and have headroom left over, my 1% is gone. So yeah, I've literally just reduced my resolution scale and changed my FPS target to demonstrate the difference that FPS cap is making. But you can see even at 70% render scale, for me, like when I've watched, I don't know, YouTube butchers the quality, but when I've watched DLSS performance benchmarks, I don't feel this is like a massive step down by running Fidelity FX and the standard resolution scale, even though it's not using like AI upscaling. I feel that the sharpening, at least at ultra wide 3440 by 1440, I feel the sharpening at 70% with the Fidelity CAS, and I think I've got my sharpening set on 80%. I feel it's comparable to DLSS performance, or DLSS, not DLSS quality, but DLSS performance has its own set of issues where it doesn't give perfect image. And I feel that this is like it's fine for me. Like the blurriness is still very similar. And where is it? Under graphics. 80% sharpness in Radeon image sharpening. And yeah, this is what I normally play at. I settle with is these settings with SSR turned off because I don't like the rain textures that suddenly the roads get wet, even when there's no rain. In some parts of the city, it happens mostly in Santo Domingo. Like drive here, Santo Domingo, drive here, and turn your SSR up. When you see a wet road, look up at the sky and see if it's raining every time, and then fast forward time to see if the road dries up and it'll stay wet. I noticed that just happens in multiple areas of the city, and it was like kind of annoying me because when I see a wet road, I think it's cool if it's reflective. But if I look up at the sky and there's no rain, the road shouldn't be that wet. Like it should be just slightly wet, and a slightly wet road does not reflect like a mirror. It's more when there's water running across it, like a steady stream of water will create a reflection, and we still get some nice pre-baked reflections from having SSR off. It's just not as super reflective everywhere. And yet the grain is too much, and it drops my FPS under 50. Like my FPS tanks kind of much lower if I set it to even medium, and I walk past like a couple cars or something, even with the FPS cap doesn't help. My GPU is just not up to it. You can see my GPU is at 99% just because SSR is turned on, and I'm not seeing a massive improvement in any reflection. Like at least in this scene, I'm seeing more graininess on the road, but the road's not necessarily reflecting anything significant anyway, and the pre-baked reflections are still roughly the same. I'm not staring at the puddle of water, like the gutter water, close enough for it to matter. But I do notice that my FPS is not as stable. So there's a reflection. There's reflections being done somewhere. Maybe these building reflections are being added. Those can be SSR. With the coloring of the sign somewhere. But like if I see those colored, the pink and the orange, I think that's somewhere up there. If I turn SSR off, maybe there is screen width. I still not 100% sure. No, they're still there. So, but my 1% and the road looks flatter and dry to me, like it should. It's not raining. The sun go. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and hope that helps you out, and you know, test it for yourself. See if you can find a better balance of performance to give yourself that little bit of headroom, and trade some of your average and your maximum for a better 1% load. And I think I've more than adequately demonstrated how to do it. It's just more your settings have to be balanced for your hardware. So if your hardware is not capable of pushing 50 FPS and that was your target, or 60 FPS, you're going to have to find where you can compromise. For me, I actually keep a lot of stuff on high because I can't stand seeing jagged shadows. And the slight blur of running a lower render scale on buildings, like distant building blur, is not that big a deal to me compared to walking past a shadow and seeing like tons of jagged edges on that shadow. Like, see these shadows here? If I turn, which one is it? Cascaded resolution down. There they are. There's the cascaded. Like, I have to, yeah. Compared to if I keep that up. It could be cascaded range as well. Affect that. No, resolution. So yeah, you see that moving shadow is like pushed now. So stuff like that I don't like to compromise with because I notice that it's much closer to my character. Same with volumetric fog at nighttime street lights. If you put it on medium or low, you get more blockiness around the lights, and the actual like volumetrics surrounding the light will creep above the light where there's not even a light being showing, and it looks really bad. So that's why I keep that on high, and I do take an FPS hit for that. It's not as bad when there's no volumetrics on the screen, but I also just, yeah, I don't want to lower that. Clouds, I want to have some clouds, and yeah, screen space I can live with being off, and ambient occlusion is on a low. But you can just see here that with these combination of settings, if I set it to 100% render scale at 340 by 4040, I tank down to like crazy low FPS. It's not playable. Like, and I'm not like, yes, everything looks way sharper when you see it on and off, but when you play with it for a while, your eyes adjust and you kind of don't mind. So yes, this looks way better. The machine looks better. The crispness looks better. Like, it's way better detail, right? If I stare at it, but then the frame rate is not worth it. And yeah, everything looks much more clear in the distance. But yeah, the frame rate is way too unstable. And I could cap it at 30, but just because it's under 30 in the first place, I don't have enough room to really cap it to a good frame rate that'll feel no input latency. Like 30 already has too high latency in the first place. So you can see my frame latency is at 33 ms. I can literally feel that in my mouse. I can feel the waviness when I try to. Even though the game's combat is fairly slow and you can like line up your shots pretty easily, I just don't like the feeling of playing like this. Maybe the lowest I would go. I mean, the lowest playable frame rate I would consider around 55 FPS, and that feels pretty good. Like, it feels like 60. But I mean, if I can run 60 by turning 70% render scale, you might be able to notice like that there was a downgrade. But if you stare at it long enough, you can't even tell anymore. Like, you start to realize, okay, it still looks good. It still looks clear when I zoom in, and this machine still looks pretty clear. So was there even a difference? Like, I can still make out all the numbers and the letters. Like, everything I can make out the first time around is still there. And those blurry bits below the name burrito do not clear up when you increase things. Yeah, you can see that it still looks good. It's not blurry.
Don't push me.
Just trade-off like that. Alright, well, I've dragged this video out enough, guys. Hope something here helps and you learn something by what the FPS cap, how it affects your system and your usage. And I hope that makes sense. Like my explanation of having like 5 or 10% of GPU headroom for handling FPS drops. Like, and that's the best way I can explain it. Is you're having extra headroom, and then when there's something intensive that has to be rendered on the screen, your GPU is not like having to juggle resources or make room for it, because that's where your FPS drops, your frame rate drops, because it's trying to free up resources to stimulate that fog or other effect on the screen. And by having that FPS cap, you've just got that little bit of extra headroom. And I could cap it more and smooth it out more, but as well, you still want to keep your frame rate as high as possible. So it's like you got to have the right balance. Like if I'm getting average 60, I don't want to cap it down at 40. I'll cap it at like 55, 50 at the lowest. And then if I'm averaging 55, I'd cap it at 45 or 50. Like around 5 to 10 FPS is where I found the sweet spot. So yeah, hopefully you guys can find it too. So yeah, thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe if you